he was surprised to find that groups of two were completely off his scale. In other words, when two people sat down to discuss something, they were so much more efficient than any other size of group that it went completely off his scale of measurement. Well, when my friend heard about this and was discussing it with the man concerned, something went on in the back of his mind. My friend, being a Muslim, thought there's something familiar here about this idea. The psychology researcher was not a Muslim. He was debating with himself on changing the topic of his thesis. Should he call it the phenomenon of two, or the two phenomenon? He was so surprised at his discovery. Meanwhile, my friend found that in the Quran there is an ayah, and he found it for himself the same night. There is an ayah which speaks on discussions and the size of groups and how efficient they are. And maybe we shouldn't be surprised to find that it is the groups that are two in number that do the best in achieving results. The ayah of the Quran reads concerning discussion groups that when discussing the Quran, one should sit alone and reflect on its meaning, or discuss it in groups of two. Now, for myself, as I said, everyone knows something for sure, or has an interest, an experience in life. My interest is mathematics and logic. There is an ayah of the Quran, it begins the 11th surah, which says, "This is a scripture whose verses are perfected and then expounded," which tells me that there are no wasted words in the Quran, that the verses, each verse is perfected and then it is explained. It couldn't be in a better form. One could not use less words to say the same thing. Or if one used more words, one would only be adding superfluous information. So this directed my attention to a particular mathematical subject, a logical subject, and I examined the Quran to see if I would find something of what I knew to be the case. A revolution in logic has occurred in the last 100 years, primarily over the difference between use and mention of words. The structure of logic seemed to be in danger of collapsing about 100 years ago, because it came to the attention of the people who study these matters that the structure was not quite sound. The issue involved, in particular, self-reference and the use and mention of words, which I'll explain just briefly. Aristotle's law of the excluded middle was the statement that every statement is either true or false. About 100 years ago, somebody pointed out that that law is a statement. Therefore, if we apply the statement to itself, the law of the excluded middle is not a law after all. It could just as well be false as well as true. This was a tangled knot for the logicians to untie until they came to understand the difference between the use and the mention of a word. When we use a word, we consider its meaning. When we mention a word, we are discussing the word itself. If I say Toronto is a large city, I mean Toronto, that place, is a large city. If I say Toronto has 7 letters, I'm talking about the word Toronto. In the first case, I used the word. In the second, I mentioned the word. You see the distinction. Now, connecting these ideas and the idea that the Quran is composed of verses that are perfected and then expounded for us, consider the ayah which says, "The likeness of Jesus before Allah is as the likeness of Adam." In Arabic, it's very clear that what we have in this statement is an equation. It reads, "Inna mathal Isa inda Allahi kamathal Adam." The likeness of Isa is as the likeness of Adam. Now, of course, the verse goes on to explain how that's true, because they both came to be under unusual circumstances, rather than having a mother and a father in the usual human reproductive way. But more than that, I got to considering the use and the mention of words. The words are used clearly enough. Jesus is like Adam, and by Jesus and Adam we mean those two men. But what about the mention of the words? Was the author aware of the fact that if we're considering the words as words in themselves, this sentence also reads that Jesus is somehow like Adam? Well, they're not spelled with the same letters. How can they be alike in this revelation? Well, the answer came to me fairly quickly, and I took a look at the index of the Quran. The index of the Quran has been available only since 1945. This book was the result of years of work by a man and his students who assembled a book which lists every word in the Quran and where it can be found. So when we look up the word Isa, Jesus, we find it in the Quran 25 times. When we look up Adam, we find it is in the Quran 25 times. The point is they're very much alike in this book, those two symbols. Just as the word or the verse reads, they are equated. So following up on this idea, I then continued to examine the index, looking for every case where something was set up as an equation, where the likeness of something was said to be as the likeness of another thing. And in every case, it works. You have, for example, in the 7th surah, the 176th ayah, it says, the likeness of those who reject our signs is as the likeness of the dog. Well, the phrase in Arabic, the people who reject our signs, will be found in the Quran exactly 5 times. And so is the Arabic word al-kalb, the dog, 5 times. And there are several instances of exactly the same occurrence. It was some months after I found this for myself that a friend of mine, who was continuing the investigation with me, made the suggestion that there are also some places in the Quran where one thing is said to be not like another thing. Well, as soon as he mentioned the thought to me, we both went for the index and had a quick look at several places where one thing is said to be not like another thing and counted their occurrence in the Quran. And we were surprised, and maybe shouldn't have been, to find that, after all, they don't match up, but an interesting thing does happen. In the case, for example, as the Quran makes it very clear in an ayah that trade is not like interest, the two words will be found 6 times for one, 7 for another. And so it is in every other case. Where one thing is said to be like another, or not like another, they occur with a difference of 1 time. It will be 5 of one, 4 of the other, or 7 of one and 8 of another. There is one interesting verse which I felt spoke directly to me from right off the page. It's in the 5th surah, the 100th ayah, which mentions 2 words in Arabic, al-khabith, the evil, and at-tayyib, the good. The verse reads, say, the evil and the good are not comparable, even though the abundance of evil will surprise you. So be mindful of your duty to Allah, O man of understanding, that you may succeed. Well, I had a look at those 2 words in Arabic, the evil and the good, and found that in the Quran they both occur 7 times. Yet the verse here is saying that they're not comparable. I shouldn't expect to find that they occur the same number of times. But what does the rest of this ayah say? The evil and the good are not comparable. The abundance of the evil will surprise you, and it did. There were too many of them. But it continues, so be mindful of your duty to Allah, O men of understanding, that you may succeed. So press on, use your understanding, and you'll succeed, is what the verse said to me. Well, in the 8th surah, I found the answer, the 37th ayah, where it reads, Allah separates the evil from the good. The evil he piles one on top of the other, heaping them all together. So here is the solution to the difficulty. While we have 7 occurrences of al-khabith, which matches up with the occurrences of the good, according to the principle in this ayah, evil is separated from good and then piled one on top of the other and heaped all together. We don't count them as 7 separate instances.